So I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's not my story to tell, but I am going to tell my side of the story. So I told you about I had an emergency I had to deal with. So I'll give you a little bit of background about that. My sister moved in with her boyfriend around the beginning of the year, and then while they were living together, she moved in with her boyfriend and his family. And while they were living together, she broke up with him. From what I hear, that entire family she was living with was very emotionally and sometimes physically abusive to her while she lived there. From what I hear, they were yelling at her every day over the smallest little inconveniences and just treating her like garbage. So she called my mom pretty frequently and would cry to my mom on the phone and tell her how much she needs help. And one day she was like, "I don't feel safe here. Please come save me. I want to come home." So my mother and I dropped everything. We flew to the Midwest to the state where she lived. We rented a car with the plan to drive her back home because she doesn't have her passport right now and she was adopted from Vietnam and she's terrified. Even though she's a US citizen, she's terrified if she goes to the airport, she's going to be detained by ICE. So instead of going through the airport, we just drove her home. She's a legal citizen. She's lived her whole life, from the time she was 9 months old, she's been a citizen of the United States, but she's terrified that since she doesn't have her passport, she's going to be deported, which is a natural fear in this day and age. So the day we landed, she met us at the airport. We rented a car and she cried a lot. She said all she wanted to do was see and hug her mother. So, it was very emotional when we first met her. And it was very hard to see because my sister's a very strong woman and she very rarely cries. So we spent the night in her city. Then we woke up, we had breakfast, and we drove to Ogden, Utah the next day with plans to go see the Salt Lake City Natural History Museum. It was a bit of a road trip we were doing, so we wanted to stop and sightsee a little bit. And my sister can be the sweetest person ever, but in a split second, she can turn into the most unpleasant nightmare in just moments. So we drove down from Ogden to the History Museum and all was well on the car ride. Right when we got to the History Museum, my sister's personality went from very happy to nightmarishly cranky. My mom parked the car and something about that upset my sister because she started lashing out at my mother and her parking her car, and she distanced herself from my mother and I while we went to the museum. She acted like she didn't even know us or wasn't part of our party. We bought tickets at the museum and we went up the first flight of stairs and we were in the museum and my sister started complaining. She started just like talking through her teeth and just like furrowing her eyebrows and she looked really pissed off. And she was like, "I want to go back home." And this is the day after we had just flown a couple hours to see her. And so she really upset my mother. And so my mother's like, "Fine, you want to go home? I'll buy you tickets home." So my mother started looking for tickets, but couldn't find any, that worked with our schedule. And I got really pissed off. And I said to her, I was like, "You just wasted my time. I wanted to schedule my test for this Friday, but instead I came to save you because you're more important to me. And now you're telling me a day after we pick you up that you want to go home? That's really, really fucking selfish and inconsiderate." I was super pissed. But I also didn't understand the full scope of the situation. So, Mom couldn't find any tickets, and so we just decided that we were going to go look at the museum because we had already spent $70 to be there, and we wanted to see the museum. And my sister walked away from our group. It was just me and my mother walking through the group, and it was really hard for us to focus on the exhibits because both of us were upset that we spent all this time and money to save my sister, and now she wants to go back home. So we looked at the exhibits, and we made it up a flight of stairs. My mother and I discussed how strange my sister's behavior was and how we both felt like she was using us, by begging us to save her, then demanding tickets back home. We got through one floor of the exhibit when all of a sudden my sister comes up the stairs, which we couldn't see her and she couldn't see us, so it was just by chance. And she started crying immediately when she saw my mother. I stepped aside and they had a short little conversation where my sister was being held by my mother and crying into her arms, talking a little bit about this and that. I went to a little different part of the museum to let them have their alone time. When they were done, my sister came over to me and she started crying and apologizing. And she hugged me, and I held her, and I rubbed her back, and I consoled her, and she started explaining to me how awful her relationship was, which I had no idea. I had my inclinations that this man she was seeing was not the best to her from phone conversations I've had to her in the past, and it always, it always disturbed me. But it's her life, and I can't tell her how to live her life. I can only listen to it and just disagree with it. So she was crying, and she was explaining to me that she felt like she had Stockholm syndrome, and how she feels like she has to go back home to help her ex-boyfriend who is abusive to her, and how she feels like from years of abuse from that man that she has to go back and save him. Essentially, she can fix him, is like the mentality. So she explained she had Stockholm syndrome, which broke my heart. And it's been hard for her because for many years, she explained to me, she's felt like she's been with people who don't really love her, and it was scary for her to be around people she knows loves and cares for her. And she apologized profusely, and as I was holding her, while she was crying, I realized she doesn't want me to solve her problems. I could have said to her, we'll move back to our state, get a job, go to college, and I know you'll get better. But that wouldn't help her because she wasn't looking for someone to solve her problems. What she wanted was for me to validate her. She said to me she felt weak, and like she said to me she felt weak, like she'd never be a victim of abuse in her life, and she was surprised that it happened to her, and she feels weak because of it, and she doesn't feel like a person. And instead of solving her problems, I validated her. I said to her, I was like, that must be very difficult for you. I'm going through my own situation with someone abusing me. It's different, but I can kind of understand. I can only imagine what it's like for you, but you're not alone. Very strong people worldwide become victims of abuse, but that doesn't mean they're weak or less of a person. You're just going through a lot right now, and I can better understand your mood swings. I love you, and I'm here to help you however you need it. And I realized that she wanted validation, not a solution. So I spent 5 minutes holding her, sobbing her while she was sobbing, and validating her. And then 2 hours later, after we had this little moment together, she was super happy. She got incredibly bubbly. And it was at that moment when she started smiling and laughing and joking and, participating with the family. That's when I realized that validation was the solution to her problem at that moment, not problem solving, because I could have probably said, okay, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and we're going to do this together. But none of that would have fixed her in the moment, because what she wanted was someone to comfort her and tell her that she's not alone, that what she's experiencing is valid, and that doesn't make her any less of a person. And what do you know? A few hours later, she was very bubbly. So I'm going to take this moment with my sister and this travel that we did together, and I'm going to definitely use it in further relationships when people come to me in hysterics. I really believe by choosing to validate her instead of solving her problems, that was what fixed her mood.